The blood on Josephine Anders's traveling dress had long since dried to a rust-brown stain, but the stage driver's eyes fixed on it like she carried the plague itself. "No, madam, I will not have you on my coach," Harold Briggs announced, his mustache bristling as he stepped between Josephine and the weathered stagecoach waiting in the dusty street of Independence, Missouri. "I run a respectable line, and I will not risk the sensibilities of my other passengers." Josephine felt her throat tighten, exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders like an iron yoke. She had walked 14 miles since dawn, her boots rubbing blisters that wept into her stockings, all to reach the morning stage that would carry her west to her sister's homestead in Colorado Territory. The blood on her dress belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman she had nursed through her final hours 2 nights past. Josephine had no other suitable traveling clothes, having sold nearly everything she owned to afford the stage fare clutched in her gloved hand. "Sir, I have my ticket paid in full," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the tears threatening behind her eyes. "I have been a nurse these past 3 years, and this staining is from my work. I assure you I carry no illness, and I have nowhere else to go." The other passengers, 3 men in business suits and a matronly woman with a pinched face, watched from their seats inside the coach. The woman whispered something to the man beside her, and he nodded with a look of distaste. "That may well be," Briggs replied, crossing his arms over his barrel chest. "But my passengers have rights too, and I will not force them to endure such an unseemly sight for 3 days of travel. Now, step aside, miss. We are already behind schedule." The June morning sun beat down on Independence's main street, the heat already shimmering off the packed earth. Josephine's carpetbag felt impossibly heavy in her hand. She had no money for lodging, no money for another dress, and the next westbound stage would not depart for 5 more days. 5 days she could not afford, with her landlady having already sold her room to another tenant. "Please," she whispered, hating the desperation in her voice. "I have nowhere to go." "Not my concern," Briggs said, turning back toward the driver's box. "Now, move along before I call the sheriff." Josephine stood frozen, her mind racing through impossible calculations. She could perhaps sleep rough, but that would leave her vulnerable to all manner of dangers. She could try to find work, but no respectable household would hire a woman who appeared on their doorstep covered in bloodstains and carrying all her worldly possessions. The walls seemed to close in around her future, crushing it to dust. "Seems to me the lady has a valid ticket." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured, with the slight drawl of someone who had spent years under open skies. Josephine turned to see a man stepping down from the wooden sidewalk. He was tall, perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim pants, a worn cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on dark hair that needed cutting. A gun belt hung at his hip, but his hands remained relaxed at his sides. "This is none of your affair, Mr. Steele," Briggs said, but something in his tone had shifted, gone cautious. "I am making it my affair," the cowboy replied, moving to stand beside Josephine. "Jackson Steele, madam," he said to her, touching the brim of his hat. "I could not help but overhear your situation." Up close, Josephine could see the fine lines around his eyes, the result of squinting into wind and sun. His face was angular, strong-featured, with a jaw that suggested stubbornness and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was set in serious lines now. "Josephine Anders," she managed. "I appreciate your concern, but I fear this is a lost cause." "Nothing is lost until you stop fighting," Jackson said, then turned his full attention to Briggs. "The lady has paid her fare. She has explained the circumstances of her appearance. You have no legal right to refuse her passage." "I have every right to maintain standards on my line," Briggs blustered, "and I will thank you to keep your nose out of my business, Steele. Just because you did some work for the company does not mean you can tell me how to run my coach." "That work I did involved tracking down the men who robbed your strongbox last autumn," Jackson said quietly. "As I recall, your company was mighty grateful when I returned every dollar and saw those thieves delivered to the marshal. But I am not calling on that favor for myself. I am calling on it for Miss Anders here." The 2 men stared at each other, and Josephine watched something unspoken pass between them. Briggs's face reddened, his jaw working as if chewing on words he could not quite spit out. "The other passengers will complain," Briggs finally said, but his voice had lost its sharp edge. "Then they can complain, Jackson replied. Miss Anders will ride this stage, as is her right. Fine, Briggs snapped. But she rides up top with the luggage, not inside. I will not have my paying customers subjected to her presence. Before Josephine could protest this humiliation, Jackson spoke again. She will ride inside, like the lady she is. And to make sure everyone is comfortable, I will purchase the remaining seat and ride along myself. That way, if anyone has complaints, they can address them to me directly. Briggs opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at Jackson's gun, then at his face, and seemed to reconsider whatever he had been about to say. Your money, he finally muttered. But when the Home Office hears about this nonsense, do not come crying to me. I would not dream of it, Jackson said. He pulled out his wallet and counted out bills for his fare, then turned to Josephine. Madam, allow me to help you aboard. Josephine felt dizzy with relief and confusion. Sir, I cannot let you spend your money on my account. You do not even know me. I know you have been nursing the sick, which makes you a braver soul than most, Jackson said. And I know you need help, and I am in a position to provide it. Sometimes that is all the knowing necessary. His hand was calloused and warm when he took her elbow to steady her as she climbed into the coach. The other passengers shifted uncomfortably, the matronly woman pressing a handkerchief to her nose. Jackson followed Josephine inside and seated himself beside her with deliberate care, his presence solid and somehow reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, he said to the other passengers, his voice pleasant but with an edge of steel underneath. This is Miss Josephine Anders. She is a nurse who has been caring for the dying, which is holy work in my estimation. Any person who has objections to her company is welcome to voice them now, and I will be happy to discuss the matter. The men in suits suddenly became very interested in looking out the windows. The matronly woman sniffed, but said nothing. Jackson settled back against the seat and tipped his hat over his eyes. It is going to be a long ride to Fort Larned, he said quietly to Josephine. You should try to rest while you can. Josephine looked at this stranger, who had just turned her disaster into deliverance, her mind whirling with questions. But exhaustion crashed over her like a wave, and she found herself too tired to do anything but whisper, Thank you. No thanks needed, Jackson replied from under his hat. We all need help sometimes. The coach lurched into motion, wheels creaking and harness bells jingling. Josephine pressed against the side of the coach, trying to make herself small, acutely aware of the disapproving glances from the woman across from her. But Jackson's presence beside her felt like a shield, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe she might actually reach her sister's home. The miles rolled past in a haze of dust and heat. The interior of the coach grew stifling as the sun climbed higher, and conversation died to uncomfortable silence. Josephine watched the Missouri countryside give way to open prairie, the settlements growing farther apart. She had been born and raised in St. Louis, and the vastness of the land made her feel small and unmoored. At the first way station, Briggs announced a 30-minute stop for a meal and fresh horses. Jackson helped Josephine down from the coach, and she stood on shaky legs, her whole body aching from the rough ride. You should eat something, Jackson said. It will be a hard stretch to the next station. I am afraid I spent my last dollars on the stage fare, Josephine admitted, shame heating her cheeks. I will be fine until we reach Fort Larned. That is 2 more days from now, Jackson said. He steered her toward the station house, a rough building of unpainted boards. You will eat, and I will hear no arguments about it. The station keeper's wife served up beans and cornbread, strong coffee, and dried apple pie. Josephine had not realized how hungry she was until the food sat before her, and she ate with an appetite that would have mortified her under other circumstances. Jackson ate his own meal in companionable silence, occasionally glancing at her as if to make sure she was real. You said you are traveling to your sister's place? He finally asked, pushing away his empty plate. Yes, to Colorado Territory. My sister Margaret married a homesteader there 2 years ago. Her husband died this spring in an accident with their wagon, and she is trying to run the homestead alone with 3 small children. She needs help, and I had nothing keeping me in Missouri anymore. Your folks? Dead these 5 years, from cholera. I trained as a nurse afterward, thinking I might save others from the same fate. But nursing is hard work and poor pay, and I was barely keeping body and soul together even before I lost my room. Jackson nodded slowly. I am sorry for your losses. Family is precious. Do you have family, Mr. Steele? Jackson, please. And yes, of a sort. I have a ranch up in Colorado, near Denver City. My partner Tom and I run cattle, about 200 head. It is not much, but it is ours free and clear. You are a long way from home. I had business in Independence, buying some breeding stock. I was planning to head back west anyway, so this coach ride saves me some hard days in the saddle. Something in his tone made Josephine think there was more to the story, but she did not press. The other passengers had taken their meal inside the station and were already reboarding the coach. Jackson offered his arm, and Josephine took it, grateful for the support. The afternoon stretched into evening, the coach rocking and swaying over increasingly rough roads. The matronly woman and her companion departed at a settlement called Willow Creek, and one of the businessmen left at a crossroads town whose name Josephine never learned. That left just Josephine, Jackson, and one remaining businessman, a portly man who snored with impressive volume. As twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Jackson finally pushed his hat back and looked at Josephine properly. "You have been nursing folk through their dying," he said quietly, so as not to wake the sleeping passenger. "That must take a toll on your spirit." "It does," Josephine admitted. She found herself wanting to talk, to unburden herself to this stranger who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "Mrs. Patterson, the woman whose blood is on my dress, she was frightened at the end. She kept calling for her daughter, who had died as a child 40 years ago. I held her hand and told her it was all right, that her daughter was waiting for her. I do not know if I truly believe in such things, but it seemed to bring her peace." "That was a mercy," Jackson said. "Dying alone and frightened must be a terrible thing. Have you seen much death, Jackson?" "Some. I was in the war, though I try not to dwell on those years. And I have seen men die on the trail, from accidents and sickness and occasionally violence. The frontier is not kind to the careless or the unlucky." "Do you fear it? Death?" Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I fear dying without having truly lived. I fear wasting the years I am given, but the act of dying itself? No. I cannot say I fear that particularly. It will come when it comes." "That is a cowboy's philosophy if ever I heard one," Josephine said, surprised to find herself almost smiling. "I suppose it is. But you spend your days staring death in the face, easing its way. That takes a different kind of courage than facing it at the end of a gun." "I never thought of it as courage. It is simply what needed doing." "That is what courage usually is." They fell silent, but it was a comfortable silence now, the awkwardness of strangers beginning to ease. Josephine found herself studying Jackson's profile in the fading light, the strong line of his nose, the way his eyes reflected the last rays of sun. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quality of reliability that she had rarely encountered in men. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly. "This morning at the stage stop. You did not know me. I could have been anyone, any sort of person." Jackson turned to look at her fully, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, some emotion she could not quite name. "Because you needed help, and I could give it. And because I know what it is to be desperate and alone with no good options. Someone showed me kindness once when I needed it most, and I have tried to pass that forward when I can." "What happened to you?" "I was 15, orphaned when my father died in a mine collapse. I had no trade, no prospects, and I was half-starved and living rough when a rancher named Thomas Bannister found me trying to steal one of his chickens. He could have had me arrested or beaten or shot. Instead, he took me on as a hand, taught me the cattle business, and treated me like a son. When he died, he left me half his ranch. Tom, my partner now, is his actual son. We run the place together. That was extraordinary kindness. It was, and it taught me that sometimes the smallest gesture can change the entire course of a life. This morning, buying that stage ticket was nothing to me, but to you, it was everything. That seems like a fair trade." Josephine felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different than the tears of despair she had fought earlier. "I will pay you back," she said. "I do not know how or when, but I will." "There is no debt," Jackson said firmly. "But if you insist on repayment, then pass the kindness forward someday when you see someone who needs it. That is payment enough." Full dark had fallen by the time they reached the next way station, a more substantial building with a barn and corrals. Briggs announced they would spend the night here, departing again at dawn. "We have rooms for the passengers," the station keeper announced, a grizzled man with one eye gone milky with cataracts. 2 bits ahead, includes breakfast. Josephine's heart sank. She had no 2 bits, no money at all beyond a few pennies in her bag. 2 rooms, Jackson said, stepping forward with coins already in hand. 1 for the lady, 1 for myself, and this gentleman. He nodded to the businessman, who had finally woken with a snort. Jackson, you cannot keep paying for everything, Josephine protested quietly. Cannot I? Last I checked, it was my money to do with, as I pleased. His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. Let me do this, Josephine, please. The way he said her name, the gentleness in it, made something flutter in her chest. She nodded, not trusting her voice. The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand, but it was clean and private. Josephine used the water in the pitcher to wash her face and hands, scrubbing at the bloodstains on her dress with limited success. She braided her dark hair, then sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the strangeness of her situation. 24 hours ago, she had been certain her life was effectively over, that she would end up destitute on the streets of Independence. Now, she was on her way to her sister's homestead, protected by a cowboy who seemed to have appeared from nowhere, like some character from a dime novel. It felt unreal, dreamlike, too good to be true in a way that made her nervous. But exhaustion won out over anxiety, and she lay down fully clothed, asleep within minutes. Morning came too early, announced by roosters and the clatter of the station keeper preparing breakfast. Josephine rose stiffly, her body protesting every movement. The meal was simple but substantial, biscuits and gravy with eggs and bacon. Jackson appeared looking fresh despite the hard travel. Annie smiled when he saw her. Morning, you look better rested. I feel almost human again, Josephine admitted. Thank you again for the room. You are welcome. We have another long day ahead. How are you holding up? Well enough. The coach is far rougher than I anticipated, but I will survive it. They boarded again, joining 2 new passengers who had been waiting at the station. The day passed in much the same pattern as before, long stretches of jolting travel broken by brief stops. But Josephine found herself talking more with Jackson, drawn out by his easy manner and genuine interest. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, her father's work as a clerk, her mother's skill with sewing. She described her nursing training, the difficult cases, the small victories, and heartbreaking losses. Jackson listened with an attention that felt like a gift, asking thoughtful questions and sharing his own stories in turn. He described life on the ranch, the rhythm of the seasons, the satisfaction of watching the herd grow. He talked about Tom, his partner and best friend, who had a gift with horses and a terrible singing voice. He spoke of the mountains, the way they looked at sunrise, purple and gold and impossibly vast. It sounds beautiful, Josephine said wistfully. It is, hard and dangerous too, but beautiful in a way that gets into your bones. Once you have seen those mountains, everything else seems smaller somehow. My sister writes that Colorado Territory is growing fast, towns springing up everywhere. That is true enough. Denver City was barely there when I first arrived 10 years ago. Now it is a proper town, with streets and shops and even a theater. Progress, they call it. Though I am not always certain it is progress in the right direction. You prefer the wild places? I do, though I understand why people want civilization. There is safety in numbers, in having laws and schools and churches. But something is lost too, a kind of freedom. Once the land is all parceled out and fenced in, the wildness goes away and does not come back. You sound like a philosopher. Jackson laughed, a warm sound that made Josephine smile in response. Hardly that. Just a man who has spent too much time alone with his thoughts. I think there is wisdom in solitude. In the city, there is so much noise, so many people always pressing in. It is hard to hear your own mind. Is that why you are going west, to find some quiet? Partly. Mostly I'm going because my sister needs me, and because there was nothing left for me in Missouri. But yes, I confess the idea of wide open spaces appeals to me. I want to see something bigger than myself. Then you have chosen the right direction. The West is nothing, if not big. By the second night, they reached Fort Larned in Kansas, a military post that also served as a major stop on the stage line. Here they would change to a different coach, one that would carry them into Colorado Territory and eventually to Denver City. Jackson secured rooms again at the post's civilian lodging, and Josephine was too grateful to protest. But after the evening meal, she pulled him aside, needing to address what had been weighing on her mind all day. Jackson, when we reach Denver City, I will be heading south to my sister's homestead. You have been so generous with me, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it, but I cannot continue to be a burden on you. Jackson looked at her seriously, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. You are not a burden, Josephine. You could never be that. But I have no way to repay you. I told you, there is no debt, but if it eases your mind, you could consider it a loan. When you are settled and have income again, you can repay me if you wish. I am not worried about it. You are too good, Jackson Steele. I do not understand why, but you are. Maybe I am selfish, he said quietly. Maybe I help you because it makes me feel good about myself. Maybe I keep buying meals and rooms because it gives me an excuse to stay near you. Josephine's heart began to beat faster. What do you mean? Jackson took a breath, then met her eyes squarely. I mean that I have enjoyed these past 2 days more than any I can remember in a long while. I mean that talking with you feels easy in a way. Talking with people usually does not. I mean that I find myself wanting to know everything about you, your favorite color, and what makes you laugh, and what you dream about when you let yourself dream. Jackson, we have only just met. I know, and maybe I am a fool for saying anything at all. But I learned during the war that life is short and uncertain, and sometimes you have to speak your truth before the chance is gone. So, here is mine. I think you are remarkable, Josephine Anders. I think you are brave and kind and stronger than you give yourself credit for, and I would very much like to continue knowing you, if you would allow it. Josephine stared at him, her mind reeling. She had noticed, of course, the way her heart lifted when Jackson smiled at her, the way she found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking. But she had told herself it was simply gratitude, the natural response to his kindness. Now he stood before her, his heart in his eyes, and she had to face her own feelings. I do not know what to say, she whispered. Say you will think about it. Say you are not entirely opposed to the idea. That is enough for now. I am not opposed, Josephine heard herself say. I find myself drawn to you as well, Jackson. But I am so unsure of everything right now. My whole life has been upended. I do not know if I can trust my own feelings. That is fair. I am not asking for promises. I am just asking for a chance. They stood in the corridor of the lodging house, other travelers moving past them, but Josephine felt as if they were alone in the world. Jackson reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong, and Josephine felt the simple touch all the way to her core. A chance, she repeated. Yes, I can give you that. Jackson smiled, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger and somehow more himself. That is all I am asking. The next morning, they boarded the westbound coach with a new driver and new passengers. The country grew drier and more desolate as they rolled toward Colorado territory, the settlements fewer and farther between. But Josephine hardly noticed the landscape. She was too aware of Jackson beside her, the warmth of him, the occasional brush of his shoulder against hers when the coach swayed. They talked less now, but the silence was charged with unspoken things. Josephine found herself thinking about the future in ways she had not allowed herself to before. She had been so focused on simply surviving, on reaching her sister's homestead, that she had not thought beyond that immediate goal. But now she imagined what might come after, and Jackson's face kept appearing in those imaginings. On the 4th day of travel, they crossed into Colorado territory. The mountains appeared on the western horizon like a mirage, purple and white, capped against the brilliant blue sky. Jackson had been right. They were vast beyond imagining, and Josephine felt her breath catch at the sight. Beautiful, are they not? Jackson said softly. They are magnificent. I have never seen anything like them. They become even more impressive up close. Your sister's homestead, is it in the mountains or on the plains? On the plains, near a town called Cedar Springs. She said it is about 40 miles south of Denver City. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. I know the area. It is good cattle country, decent water. The homestead should do well there if your sister can hold on to it. I mean to help her do exactly that. Between the two of us, we can manage. I do not doubt it. You are not a woman who gives up easily. They reached Denver City on the 5th evening, pulling in amid a flurry of activity. The town was larger than Josephine had expected, with proper streets and two-story buildings, hotels and saloons and shops of all descriptions. The mountains loomed close now, dominating the western skyline. Briggs brought the coach to a halt outside a large building, with a sign reading, Overland Stage Company. Passengers began to disembark, collecting their luggage and dispersing into the town. Jackson helped Josephine down, then retrieved her carpet bag and his own saddle and gear. The southbound stage to Cedar Springs does not run until day after tomorrow, Jackson said. You will need lodging until then. I was hoping to find work, perhaps at a hotel or a restaurant to earn my keep, Josephine said. Or you could be my guest for another couple of days, Jackson replied. My ranch is about 10 miles from here. There is plenty of room, and Tom's wife Emma would be glad of female company. She complains constantly that she is surrounded by rough cowboys with no manners. Josephine hesitated. She wanted to accept, wanted to spend more time with Jackson, but she was also aware of propriety. Would that be appropriate? I would not want to damage your reputation or mine. Emma will serve as chaperone, and she is more than respectable enough to satisfy any concerns. Tom and I have a couple of hands who stay in the bunkhouse, and there is a spare room in the main house where you can sleep. It is all perfectly proper, I promise. Then yes, I would like that very much. Jackson's smile was like sunrise. He secured horses from a livery, a gentle mare for Josephine, and a tall bay gelding for himself, and they rode out of Denver City as the sun set behind the mountains. Josephine had limited experience with horses, but the mare was patient with her inexperience, and Jackson kept a careful pace. The ranch appeared in the twilight, a cluster of buildings at the base of the foothills. The main house was built of solid logs with a wide porch and stone chimney. A barn and several corrals stood nearby, along with a smaller bunkhouse. Cattle dotted the pastures, dark shapes in the fading light. A woman emerged from the house as they rode up, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 25, with red hair pulled back in a practical bun and a smattering of freckles across her nose. Jackson Steele, you had better have a good explanation for being 5 days late, she called out. Tom has been worrying himself sick, and I have been eating worry right alongside him. Sorry, Emma, I got delayed in Independence. Jackson dismounted and helped Josephine down. Emma Steele, may I present Miss Josephine Anders. Josephine, this is Emma, Tom's wife and the real boss of this operation. Emma's expression shifted from exasperation to curiosity as she looked at Josephine. Her eyes took in the blood-stained dress and worn traveling clothes, but there was no judgment in her face, only warm interest. Miss Anders, welcome. Any friend of Jackson's is welcome here. Come inside and I will get you something to eat. You look like you have been through an ordeal. Thank you, Mrs. Steele. I apologize for intruding on you without warning. Nonsense. We are always happy for company. And call me Emma, please. We do not stand on formality out here. The interior of the house was warm and welcoming, with furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and something savory bubbled in a pot hanging over the flames. Emma bustled about, setting out plates and cutting bread, while Jackson went to find Tom. How did you meet Jackson? Emma asked as she worked. He helped me when I was in trouble, Josephine said simply. The stage driver did not want to let me board because of my appearance. Jackson intervened on my behalf. That sounds like him. He has always had a soft spot for people in need. Emma glanced at Josephine with sharp intelligence. But there is more to it than that, I think. I saw the way he looked at you. Josephine felt her cheeks heat. We have only known each other a few days. Sometimes that is all it takes. I knew I would marry Tom after talking to him for about an hour. Sometimes you just know. Before Josephine could respond, 2 men entered through the back door. One was clearly Tom, with red hair like his wife's and a lean, rangy build. The other was Jackson, and seeing him in his own home, relaxed and smiling, made Josephine's heart skip. Tom, this is Miss Josephine Anders, Jackson said. Josephine, my partner Tom Steele. Madam, pleased to meet you, Tom said, shaking her hand with a grip that was firm but careful. Any friend of Jackson's is family here. They sat down to dinner, a hearty stew with fresh bread and butter, and Josephine found herself relaxing in a way she had not in months. Emma and Tom were easy company, teasing each other, and Jackson with the comfort of long familiarity. They asked about Josephine's journey, and she found herself telling the whole story, from Mrs. Patterson's death to the confrontation with Briggs to Jackson's intervention. "You should have seen him," Josephine said, smiling at the memory. "He was so calm, but there was steel underneath it. Briggs backed down without much of a fight." "That is Jackson's way," Tom said. "He does not bluster or threaten, but you know he means what he says. I have seen him talk down angry cowboys, hostile Indians, and once a bear that wandered into our barn." "You talked down a bear?" Josephine asked Jackson, incredulous. "More like I convinced it the barn was not worth its time," Jackson said with a laugh. "I may have embellished that story a bit for dramatic effect." "He sold himself short," Emma said. "The bear was between him and a calf that had gotten trapped." Jackson stood his ground and made noise until the bear decided to find easier prey. "It was the bravest, stupidest thing I ever saw." "It worked, did it not?" Jackson said. After dinner, Emma showed Josephine to the spare room, a small but comfortable space with a real bed and clean linens. "I will fetch some water so you can wash, and I have a dress you can borrow if you like. We are about the same size, I think." "You do not have to do that," Josephine protested, but Emma waved her off. "I insist. That dress you are wearing needs burning, no offense. Besides, I do not get much chance to share clothes. It will be fun." True to her word, Emma returned with hot water and a simple blue calico dress that looked almost new. "I made this last year, but never really liked how it fit me. I think it will suit you better." Josephine washed thoroughly for the first time in days, scrubbing away the grime of travel, then slipped into the borrowed dress. It fit reasonably well, perhaps a bit loose in the waist, but otherwise fine. She brushed out her dark hair and re-braided it, then looked at herself in the small mirror hung on the wall. She looked like herself again, or perhaps like a better version of herself, clean and rested and almost pretty in the soft lamplight. When she emerged, Jackson was sitting on the porch, and he stood as she approached. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Emma loaned me the dress. I feel human again. Will you sit with me for a bit? The stars are out." They sat side by side on the porch steps, looking up at the sky. Josephine had never seen so many stars, thousands upon thousands scattered across the darkness like diamond dust. "It is overwhelming," she whispered. "That is the right word for it. I sometimes come out here when I cannot sleep, just to look at them. It puts things in perspective, seeing how vast it all is." "Do you have trouble sleeping often?" "Sometimes, memories mostly, things from the war that will not let go." Josephine reached out and took his hand without thinking. "I am sorry. I cannot imagine what you saw. It was a long time ago. I have made peace with most of it, but there are nights when it comes back, and those are hard." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, until Josephine began to yawn. "I should let you get some rest," Jackson said. "You have been through a lot. So have you, traveling all that way, and then riding out here tonight. I am used to hard riding, but you need sleep in a real bed. We can talk more tomorrow." Josephine stood reluctantly. "Good night, Jackson. Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for coming." He stood as well, still holding her hand. For a moment, Josephine thought he might kiss her, and her heart raced at the possibility. But Jackson only raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, a gesture both old-fashioned and achingly romantic. "Sleep well, Josephine." She went to bed with her heart full of confused feelings, her mind replaying every moment of the day. She had come west expecting hardship and struggle, a desperate attempt to help her sister survive. She had not expected to meet a man like Jackson Steele, had not expected to feel this pull towards someone she barely knew. But as she drifted towards sleep, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay here, to build a life in this wild, beautiful place with this good, gentle man. Morning came bright and clear, the sun streaming through the window to wake her. Josephine dressed quickly and found Emma in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with practiced efficiency. "Good morning. I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months. Your hospitality has been a blessing, Emma." "I am glad. Coffee is hot if you want some, and there are biscuits from last night in the tin there." Josephine poured coffee and helped herself to a biscuit, then asked, "Is there anything I can help with? I do not want to be idle." "Can you cook?" "Reasonably well. I am better at nursing than cooking, but I can manage most basic meals." "Then you can help me with dinner. We are having Tom's birthday supper tonight. Nothing fancy, just the four of us. But I am making a cake and roasting a chicken. I would be happy to help." They worked together through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Emma talked about her life on the ranch, how she and Tom had met when he came to Denver City to sell cattle, and she had been working in her father's mercantile. They had married after a brief courtship, and she had moved to the ranch, leaving behind city life for this harder but more satisfying existence. "Do you ever regret it?" Josephine asked. "Not for a moment. Oh, there are hard days, days when I miss my family, or wish for a proper bath, or want to see a play or buy a new dress without having to think about whether we can afford it. But Tom is a good man, and this life has meaning. We are building something together, and that matters." "You sound very happy." "I am, but I was also lucky to find a man worth loving. They are rarer than you might think." Emma gave Josephine a knowing look. "Jackson is one of the good ones, in case you are wondering. I barely know him. But you want to know him better. I can see it in how you look at him." Josephine did not deny it. "He has been so kind to me, but I am afraid to trust it, afraid it is too good to be true." "Jackson does not play games. If he cares for you, and I believe he does, then it is real and honest. The question is whether you care for him." "I think I do. But everything has happened so fast. A week ago, I was in Missouri with no prospects. Now I am in Colorado territory, staying at a ranch with people I just met, feeling things for a man I barely know. It feels like standing on the edge of a cliff." Emma smiled. "That is what falling in love feels like. Terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But you can step back from the cliff if you want. Or you can jump and trust that the landing will be worth it. How do I know which choice is right? You do not really. You just have to listen to your heart and hope for the best." Jackson and Tom came in for the noon meal, dusty from working with the cattle. Jackson smiled when he saw Josephine, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. After they ate, Tom declared he needed Jackson's help mending a fence, and they departed again. "They will be gone most of the afternoon," Emma said, "which gives us time to make Tom's birthday cake. Do you have any skill with baking?" "Some. My mother taught me the basics." They spent the afternoon in the warm kitchen, measuring and mixing, the sweet smell of cake filling the house. Emma was easy to talk to, and Josephine found herself sharing things she had told no one, her fears about her sister's situation, her own sense of being adrift in the world, her complicated feelings about Jackson. "I keep thinking there must be something wrong with him," Josephine admitted, as she beat eggs for the cake frosting. "No man is this perfect, kind and brave and handsome, generous and thoughtful. There must be a flaw I am not seeing." "Oh, he has flaws," Emma said cheerfully. "He leaves his boots wherever he takes them off, and Emma complains he tracks mud everywhere. He cannot carry a tune to save his life. He gets moody sometimes and goes off alone for days. And he has a tendency to take on everyone's problems but ignore his own needs. Those are not terrible flaws. No, they are not. But they are real, and they remind you he is human and not some storybook hero. The question is not whether he has flaws. The question is whether you can love him anyway, flaws and all." The cake was a success, golden and fragrant when Emma pulled it from the oven. They let it cool, then applied a simple frosting of sugar and butter. Emma also roasted a chicken with potatoes and carrots, and by the time Tom and Jackson returned, the table was laden with food. "It smells like heaven in here," Tom said, kissing Emma's cheek. "Is that cake?" "It is your birthday cake, and you cannot have any until after dinner." They ate with good appetite, talking and laughing, and Josephine felt a pang of longing for this kind of life. She had been alone for so long, making her way in a world that seemed designed to grind single women down. But here, surrounded by warmth and friendship, she glimpsed what life could be like with the right people. After dinner, Emma produced the cake with 26 candles stuck in it, and they sang to Tom, who turned red with embarrassment and pleasure. Josephine found herself singing along, caught up in the simple joy of the moment. Later, after the dishes were washed and put away, Jackson asked Josephine if she wanted to see the ranch properly. They walked out into the cool evening, the mountains glowing pink and orange in the setting sun. "You have a beautiful place here," Josephine said. "Thank you. It has been 10 years in the making, and it still feels like a miracle sometimes that it is ours. Tom and I started with nothing but determination and old Thomas's faith in us. Emma told me about how you came to own it. Thomas was a good man. He saw potential in me when I was nothing but a half-starved boy trying to steal food. I owe him everything. I think you have repaid that debt many times over." They walked through the pasture, cattle lifting their heads to watch them pass. Jackson pointed out various landmarks: the creek that provided water, the stands of cottonwood trees, the summer pastures in the higher elevations. In winter, we bring them down close to the barn and feed hay. In spring, we drive them up to the mountain meadows. In fall, we round them up and separate out the ones to sell. It is hard work, but good work. You love it. I do. I love the freedom of it, the way each day brings something different. I love being out under the sky, responsible to no one but myself and Tom and the animals in our care. I understand that. Nursing had its rewards, but I always felt constrained, always following someone else's rules and orders. What would you do if you could do anything? If money and circumstances were not obstacles? Josephine thought about that, really thought about it. I think I would want to help people in a different way, not just nursing the sick, but maybe teaching health and hygiene, particularly to women and children. So many deaths could be prevented with basic knowledge of cleanliness and nutrition. But that is a dream, not a plan. Dreams are important. They give you something to aim for. What do you dream about, Jackson? He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the mountains. I dream about building something lasting. Not just the ranch, though, that is part of it. I dream about having a family, children who will carry on what we have started. I dream about growing old with someone I love, watching the years pass in a place that feels like home. His voice was wistful, and Josephine felt her heart ache with the beauty and simplicity of his vision. That is a good dream. It is. But it requires finding someone who shares that dream, who wants to build that life together. I have been looking for years, but I never met anyone who felt right, until now. He turned to face her, and Josephine saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope and fear mingled together. Josephine, I know it is soon. I know we have only known each other a handful of days, but I also know my own heart, and it is telling me that you are the person I have been waiting for. I do not expect you to feel the same way, not yet, but I am asking you to consider the possibility. Consider staying here, not going to your sister's homestead. Consider building a life with me. Josephine's breath caught. Jackson, I cannot. My sister needs me. She is struggling to keep her homestead, and I am her only family. I understand that, but what if we could help her together? What if I could offer her a partnership? Let her and her children come here to the ranch. There is plenty of room, plenty of work. She would not have to manage alone anymore, and you could still be close to her. You would do that? Take on a widow and 3 children you have never met? If it meant having you in my life, yes. In a heartbeat. Tears filled Josephine's eyes. Why? Why do you care so much about someone you barely know? Because I do know you, in all the ways that matter. I know you are brave and compassionate. I know you have endured hardship and loss and come through it still believing in goodness. I know that talking to you feels like coming home after a long journey. And I know that when I think about my future now, you are in it. Every vision, every dream, you were there. That has to mean something. Josephine wiped at her eyes, her heart hammering. She wanted to say yes, wanted to throw caution to the wind and embrace this gift he was offering. But fear held her back, fear of trusting something so new and fragile. I need time, she whispered. I need to think about this, to be sure. This is my whole life, my whole future. I cannot make that decision lightly. I know, and I am not asking you to decide right now, but I am asking you to give us a chance. Let me court you properly. Let me show you what life could be like here. And if, after you have had time to think and consider, you decide it is not what you want, I will respect that. I will help you get to your sister's homestead, and I will wish you well. You would do that, even if I said no? Of course. Your happiness matters more to me than my own desires. I want you to choose this life because it is what you truly want, not because you feel obligated or have no other options. Josephine looked at this man who stood before her, offering her everything and asking for nothing but time and consideration. She thought of Emma's words about jumping off the cliff and trusting the landing. She thought of her own dreams, half-formed and uncertain, and how Jackson's vision somehow fit with them, made them feel possible. All right, she said, I will stay for a while. I will let you court me properly, but I need to write to my sister, explain the situation. And if she truly needs me, if she cannot manage without me, then I will have to go. That is fair. We can send a letter with the next rider heading south. And in the meantime, I will do my best to prove to you that this is where you belong. Jackson reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Thank you for giving me this chance. Thank you for wanting me to have one." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Josephine felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness she had not felt in longer than she could remember. She did not know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt hopeful about it. The next morning, Josephine sat down to write a letter to her sister. It was difficult to find the right words, to explain how her plans had changed so drastically, but she tried to be honest, describing Jackson's offer to help Margaret and her children, the possibility of them all living on the ranch together. Emma read the letter over her shoulder and nodded approvingly. "That is a generous offer, and I think Margaret would be a fool to refuse it. A homestead is brutal to manage alone, especially with young children. I hope she sees it that way, but I also worry she will feel like I am abandoning her. You are not abandoning anyone. You are offering her a lifeline. There is a difference." The letter went out that afternoon with a cowboy heading to Cedar Springs on business. Now, all Josephine could do was wait for a response. In the meantime, Jackson was true to his word about courting her properly. He showed her every corner of the ranch, teaching her about the cattle and the horses, the rhythms of ranch life. He took her riding in the foothills, showing her views that stretched for miles. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams. Emma became a close friend, sharing the women's work that kept the ranch running, cooking and cleaning, tending the garden and chickens. She taught Josephine how to churn butter and smoke meat, how to mend clothes and make soap. It was practical knowledge, the kind Josephine's city upbringing had not provided, and she soaked it up eagerly. Tom treated her like a sister, teasing her gently and including her in the easy camaraderie of the ranch. The two hired hands, a young man named Billy and an older cowboy called Dutch, were respectful and friendly, accepting her presence without question. Days turned into a week, then two. Josephine found herself falling into the rhythm of ranch life, her body growing stronger from the physical work, her spirit lighter than it had been in years. And always there was Jackson, steady and patient, showing her through actions what his words had promised. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows. He taught her to fish in the creek that ran through their property. He sat with her in the evenings, reading aloud from books he loved, or just talking quietly as the sun set. He was attentive without being smothering, affectionate without being presumptuous, respectful of her need for time and space to sort through her feelings. And Josephine felt herself falling in love. It was not the dramatic, overwhelming passion of stories, but something quieter and deeper, a growing certainty that this was where she was meant to be. She loved the way Jackson's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he treated everyone with the same quiet respect, regardless of their station. She loved his gentleness with the animals, his patience when teaching her something new. She loved his strength, both physical and moral, the sense that here was a man who would stand firm when storms came. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after her arrival, they sat together on the porch as the stars came out. Josephine had been quiet all day, working through something in her mind. "I received a response from Margaret today," she finally said. Jackson went very still beside her. "What did she say?" "She was surprised by your offer, and grateful. She admits she has been struggling, that she is not sure how much longer she can hold on to the homestead. She says she will think about accepting, about bringing the children here, but she also said something else." "What was that?" "She said she knows I have feelings for you, that it came through clearly in my letter, even though I tried to be matter-of-fact about it. She said she would not stand in the way of my happiness, that I have sacrificed enough for others, and it is time I thought of myself. She gave me her blessing, Jackson. She told me to follow my heart." "And what is your heart telling you?" Josephine turned to look at him, this man who had changed everything with a simple act of kindness. "It is telling me that I love you, that I want to stay here, build a life with you, that when I think about the future now, I cannot imagine it without you in it." Jackson's face transformed, joy and relief and love shining from him. "Josephine, are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying yes. Yes to staying, yes to building a life together, yes to whatever comes next. I am saying I love you, Jackson Steele, and I want to be your wife if you will have me." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Josephine felt his heart racing against hers. "If I will have you, Josephine, you are everything I ever hoped for, and more. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." He pulled back just enough to kiss her, a gentle kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate, years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "I will spend the rest of my life proving how much." "I love you too, and I am sorry it took me so long to say it." "You took exactly as long as you needed. I would have waited years if necessary." They went inside to share the news with Tom and Emma, who responded with whoops of joy and immediate plans for a wedding. Emma hugged Josephine fiercely, whispering, "I told you the landing would be worth it." The wedding took place a month later, on a golden September morning, with the aspen trees just beginning to turn yellow. Margaret arrived 3 weeks before the ceremony with her 3 children, grateful to accept Jackson's offer of a place on the ranch. She and Josephine wept together, holding each other tight, 2 sisters who had both lost so much and were finally finding their way to something better. Margaret's children, 2 boys aged 7 and 5 and a girl aged 3, brought new life to the ranch. Tom and Emma doted on them, and Jackson proved to have a natural way with children, patient and playful in equal measure. The ceremony itself was simple, held in the yard of the ranch with a traveling preacher officiating. Josephine wore a new dress Emma had sewn for her, white cotton with blue ribbons. Jackson wore his best clothes, his hair freshly cut, his face shining with happiness. Tom stood up as Jackson's best man, and Margaret served as Josephine's attendant. The vows they spoke were traditional, but Josephine felt the weight of every word, the promise to love and honor and cherish. When Jackson slipped a simple gold band on her finger, tears rolled down her cheeks. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher intoned. "You may kiss your bride." Jackson kissed her tenderly, and the small gathering erupted in cheers. Emma had prepared a feast, and they celebrated late into the evening with food and music and dancing. Billy played a fiddle with surprising skill, and Dutch surprised everyone by singing in a surprisingly fine baritone. When the celebration finally wound down, Jackson led Josephine to the room that would now be theirs, a larger room that Tom and Emma had helped him prepare. Someone had filled it with wildflowers, and a quilt Emma had made lay across the bed. "Are you happy?" Jackson asked, holding both her hands. "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. Thank you for refusing to give up on me, even when I was too afraid to hope. Thank you for giving me the chance to love you. You have made me the luckiest man alive." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a celebration of the love they had built over weeks of patient courtship. Josephine had been nervous, but Jackson's gentleness put her at ease, and she discovered that intimacy with someone you loved was something beautiful and right. The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch faced hard winters and dry summers, cattle losses, and financial pressures. Margaret's children needed time to adjust to their new life, and there were days when grief over their father's death overwhelmed them. Josephine sometimes missed the city, missed the work of nursing, missed the sense of purpose it had given her. But through it all, Jackson was her anchor and her joy. He supported her when she started teaching basic health and hygiene to the families in the surrounding area, riding with her to distant homesteads and ranches. He encouraged her to expand her teaching, and eventually she started holding regular classes in Denver City for women wanting to learn about caring for their family's health. Margaret thrived on the ranch, taking over management of the horses and proving to have her late husband's skill with training them. Her children grew strong and healthy, calling Jackson and Josephine aunt and uncle with easy affection. Tom and Emma's family grew as well, 3 children born over the years, and the ranch expanded to accommodate them all. It became a true family operation, everyone contributing according to their abilities and sharing in the successes. Josephine and Jackson's own family began 2 years after their wedding, with the birth of a robust baby boy they named James Thomas after Jackson's benefactor. A daughter followed 3 years later, Helen Margaret, named for both sisters. Another son arrived when Josephine was 32, a surprise pregnancy that brought them Samuel. Jackson was a devoted father, patient with the children's questions and enthusiastic about their education. He taught them to ride and rope, to read, and to treat all people with respect. Josephine taught them letters and numbers, history and science, determined they would have opportunities she and Jackson had lacked in their own childhoods. The ranch prospered over the years, growing from 200 head of cattle to over 1,000. They added sheep as well, a decision that initially caused tension with neighboring cattlemen, but ultimately proved profitable. Dutch stayed on until his death at age 68, and Billy eventually married a girl from Denver City and started his own small ranch nearby. Josephine never forgot where she had come from, the desperate woman standing in the dusty street of Independence, Missouri, her future seeming impossible. She made sure to help others when she could, offering work to people down on their luck, teaching her skills to anyone who wanted to learn, providing support to widows and orphans whenever possible. Jackson often teased her that she had taken his philosophy of paying kindness forward and turned it into a full-time occupation. But he supported every charity, every person she brought home, every cause she championed. He understood that her generous heart was part of why he loved her, and he would not have changed it for anything. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Josephine back to the spot where they had first arrived at the ranch all those years ago. Their children were grown now, James working the ranch alongside Tom's sons, Helen married to a school teacher in Denver City, Samuel studying to be a veterinarian. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked, holding her hand as they looked out over land they had built a life upon. "Choosing this life instead of going to your sister's homestead all those years ago?" Josephine looked at him, this man who had saved her with a simple act of kindness and then loved her with patient devotion for a quarter century. His hair was gray at the temples now, and lines creased his face, but his eyes were the same creek-water green that had caught her attention that first day. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me yourself, which was the greatest gift of all. You gave me the same. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You brought meaning to every day, made everything matter more." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains they both loved. The years had brought them joy and sorrow, triumph and loss. But through it all, they had faced everything together. And that, Josephine thought, was what love truly meant. Not the dramatic gestures or passionate declarations, though those had their place, but the quiet devotion of showing up every day, choosing each other over and over again, building something lasting together. "I love you," she said, words that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I love you too," Jackson replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for boarding that stage all those years ago. Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for making me change my mind," Josephine said with a smile. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to fight for me when I was too scared to fight for myself." As the stars began to appear overhead, they walked back to the house together, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. Behind them lay 25 years of shared history, a lifetime of memories and moments that had shaped them both. Ahead lay years still to come, grandchildren to spoil and new adventures to share. But in that moment, walking through the twilight toward the warm lights of home, Josephine felt perfectly content. She had come west expecting hardship and found love instead. She had boarded a stagecoach as a desperate woman with no future and disembarked as someone with everything to live for. And it had all started with a cowboy who refused to let injustice stand, who stepped forward when others looked away, who saw beyond bloodstains and rumpled clothes to the person underneath. Jackson Steele had changed her life with a simple act of kindness, and she had spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift. As they reached the porch, their children and grandchildren spilled out to greet them, and Josephine was enfolded in love and laughter. This was her life now, this beautiful chaotic joy, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. The frightened woman who had stood before a stagecoach in Independence, Missouri, felt like someone from another lifetime. That woman had been broken and alone, desperate and terrified. But Jackson had seen past all of that to who she really was, who she could become. He had offered her not just help, but hope. And from that hope had grown this life, this family, this love that had sustained them through a quarter century and would carry them through all the years to come. The Wild West had a reputation for being harsh and unforgiving, and Josephine had seen enough of that harshness to know it was real. But she had also discovered that the frontier could be a place of new beginnings, where people could shed their pasts and become something new, where kindness still mattered, where love could bloom in unexpected places, where two lonely people could find each other and build something beautiful together. As she sat down to the anniversary dinner her family had prepared, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Josephine caught Jackson's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that warm, familiar smile that still made her heart skip, and raised his glass in a silent toast. She raised hers in return, honoring the journey they had taken together, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them through everything. It had all started with a stage driver who refused to let her board, and a cowboy who made him change his mind real quick. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a lifetime of love, a legacy of kindness, and a family that would carry their story forward into the future. And as Josephine looked around the table at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at Margaret and her family, at Tom and Emma and their brood, she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twisting path that had brought her here. She had set out for Colorado territory expecting to sacrifice herself for her sister's welfare, prepared to endure whatever hardships came her way. Instead, she had found Jackson, and in finding him, she had found herself, the person she was always meant to be. Together, they had built not just a ranch, but a life of meaning and purpose, a place where kindness was valued and love was the foundation of everything. The Wild West had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately blessed them. And Josephine knew, with the certainty that came from 25 years of shared life, that she would make the same choices all over again. She would board that stagecoach in her bloodstained dress, would accept Jackson's help, would take the leap of faith that had brought her to this moment, because every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt had been worth it to arrive here, surrounded by love and laughter, safe in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The frightened nurse who had stood in Independence's dusty street had become a wife, a mother, a teacher, and a pillar of her community. She had become someone who mattered, not just to Jackson, but to all the lives she had touched over the years. And it had all begun with one man's refusal to let injustice stand, one act of kindness that had rippled outward to change not just 2 lives, but dozens, creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As the evening wore on and the family continued to celebrate, Josephine felt Jackson's hand find hers under the table, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. No words were needed. They had said everything that mattered over the years, and now they simply existed together in perfect understanding. This was love, Josephine thought. Not just the passion and romance, though those were wonderful, but this deep abiding partnership, this sense of being known completely and loved anyway. This feeling of home that had nothing to do with buildings and everything to do with the person beside you. The Wild West had given her many things, but the greatest gift was Jackson Steele, and she would spend every remaining day of her life being grateful for the moment he stepped forward and refused to let a stage driver turn her away. That moment had seemed small at the time, just one man standing up for a stranger, but it had been the first step on a journey that had led to everything she held dear. As the celebration finally wound down and the family began to depart for their own homes, Jackson and Josephine stood on the porch, waving goodbye. When the last wagon had disappeared into the darkness, they turned to each other. 25 years, Jackson said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean. I can barely remember life before you, and I do not want to imagine life without you. You will never have to. I plan to love you for at least another 25 years, and then we will see about extending the contract. Josephine laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet ranch. It is a deal, Cowboy. You are stuck with me. Best fate I could imagine, Jackson replied, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. They stood together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The ranch stretched around them in the darkness, filled with animals and people they loved, the fruit of a quarter-century of hard work and devotion. And Josephine knew, with absolute certainty, that every moment had been worth it. Every hardship endured, every challenge faced, every sacrifice made had led to this perfect moment of contentment and joy. She was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the right person, living exactly the life she was meant to live. The Wild West had delivered on its promise of new beginnings, and Josephine and Jackson had seized that promise with both hands, turning it into a love story that would be told by their grandchildren and great-grandchildren for generations to come. A story that began with a desperate woman and a kind cowboy, and grew into something beautiful and enduring. As they finally went inside to their own bed, their own room, their own space carved out of the wilderness through years of effort, Josephine took one last look at the stars overhead. They shone as brightly as they had that first night Jackson had shown her the view from the porch, eternal and unchanging. But everything else had changed, transformed by love and commitment and the simple choice to take a chance on happiness. "Thank you," she whispered to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had brought Jackson into her life that day in Independence. "Thank you for everything." And the stars blazed on overhead, silent witnesses to a love story that had begun with a stagecoach and a cowboy's refusal to let injustice stand, and had grown into a legacy that would outlast them both. In the Wild West, where life was hard and uncertain, where survival itself was never guaranteed, Josephine and Jackson had found something rare and precious. They had found each other, and in doing so, had found home.